The trickster has got us. We were laughing at him, thinking it was a dark force that could not reach us. But we didn't understand that the dark force was within us as well. And now he's got us, and the most powerful nation in the world is in the hands of the trickster. And we have no idea what trick will be played on us next. Jung explains that the archetype of the trickster represents a repressed aspect of the dark shadow that becomes split off from our personality, both individual and collective, because we would rather not have to deal with it. Jung states, the trickster figure works because secretly it participates in the observer's psyche and appears as its reflection, though it is not recognized as such. It is split off from his consciousness and consequently behaves like an autonomous personality. The trickster is a collective shadow figure, a reflection of all the inferior traits of character in individuals. Trump's personality resounds with the repressed inferior character traits of individuals in our society. He is narcissistic, reactive, and unreflective. During his campaign, he stirred up feelings of fear, racism, and misogyny. Now elected, some of his supporters feel free to express these repressed feelings in a damaging and divisive way. Clearer still is his behavior as an autonomous personality. We never know what direction Trump is going in because he doesn't know. Further, he reserves the right to change his mind at any time. Such an attitude is what we could describe as being mercurial. And it is the Roman god Mercury, synonymous with the Greek god Hermes, who is associated with the trickster archetype. Hermes is the god responsible for carrying messages from heaven to earth, from God to humankind, a divine messenger. Edward Edinger tells us, he is a wind god and he moves with the wind. He is the god of revelation, the bringer of dreams, the guide of the dark way. Hermes is the great trespasser, a crosser of boundaries. He can be ambiguous, false, and cunning, and that gets him into places that absolute light and clarity could never enter. The crosser of boundaries, the great trespasser, false and cunning. Sounding familiar? But here's the catch. Trump is not living out the trickster archetype. The trickster archetype is living him out. As Jung famously put it, it's not so much that we have a complex, but rather that the complex has us. The most obvious example of this is the great likelihood that Trump never expected to get elected president himself, a most ironic trick that was played on him. Jung states further of the trickster, the so-called civilized man has forgotten the trickster. He remembers him only figuratively and metaphorically when, irritated by his own ineptitude, he speaks of fate playing tricks on him or of things being bewitched. He never suspects that his own hidden and apparently harmless shadow has qualities whose dangerousness exceeds his wildest dreams. As soon as people get together in masses and submerge the individual, the shadow is mobilized and, as history shows, may even be personified and incarnated. Jung was writing at the time of the incarnation of evil that was wrought in Nazi Germany, led by Hitler. This archetype of evil not only possessed Hitler, but because of the trust he engendered in the German people, was responsible for spreading a mass psychosis throughout German society. This huge inflation of the blonde beast, as Nietzsche named this dark shadow of the German psyche, resulted in the destruction of tens of millions of people over the next decade. This wasn't long ago, only 2 generations in our collective past. And it's chillingly similar to the mob feelings of fear, hate, and racism evoked by Trump at his mass rallies. The trickster as warning. Jung further states about the trickster figure that the shadow, although by definition a negative figure, sometimes has certain clearly discernible traits and associations which seem to point to a quite different background. It's as though it were hiding meaningful contents under an unprepossessing exterior. From a psychological perspective, it's our own apathy and complacency, individually and collectively, that has constellated a compensating reaction from the collective unconscious. We had fallen into our own trickster shadow, an unconscious state, politically and morally. This came about by not paying enough attention to those left behind socially and economically over the last few decades. The liberal majority have also collectively pushed political correctness to sometimes unreasonable limits, suppressing our own darker attitudes. Trump's election can also be seen psychologically as a regression, a conscious attempt to turn back the clock and live life from a simpler perspective, a time when the United States was more white and European, a time which feels safer and more secure than the present for those most displaced. This is true of the recent vote in Britain to leave the European Union and reflected in the rise of nationalism and the extreme political right in other European countries, such as France, Germany, and Hungary, just to name a few. But with Trump in America being possessed by the archetypal trickster, we have no idea what he'll do from one day to the next. And that is an exponentially greater danger in an unstable world. On one level, what we are witnessing is a psychological split or dissociation between the right and the left. This split is between younger, well-educated social liberals and slower adapting, older, and less educated social conservatives. The shrillest voices come from the most extreme on each side of the equation. The more strenuous their efforts, the greater the polarity produced. The tension between these opposites within both the American and global psyche is immense. Each side is clearly the shadow of the other, and evidence of this projection of the shadow onto the other abounds geopolitically. In the United States, Trump and his cronies took full advantage of this ideological split. He preached a strong nationalist and populist message and capitalized on people's hate and fear, the inferior traits in our collective culture. He did it so well, he got himself elected president, a most unlikely outcome, or so most of us thought. But now Trump has got us, even as the trickster has him. Within this new dynamic, we must now confront the trickster as it manifests within him. It's a wake-up call and a warning as to what is going on in the shadowlands of the American and global psyche. But while it's a clear and present danger to us, it's also an unprecedented opportunity to become more conscious of ourselves psychologically. This is the hidden meaning and value that the trickster brings to us. The repression of truth. One of the most troubling aspects of the Trump administration is their irregular relationship with the truth. Real news is often branded by them as fake news, and bald lies are spoken by them that they insist are true. They will continue on repeating these lies no matter they have no facts to back them up. The trickster, as false and cunning, is apparent in everything they do. But if we can't agree on what the basic facts are, how can any middle ground be found to resolve any issues? The trickster, however, doesn't want to compromise with the status quo. The trickster wants to destroy the existing political structure. And it's important to understand that this feeling is right, psychologically speaking. The current political landscape has become corrupt, and the ruling principle it runs on, greed and power, does need to be replaced. But not by the false national populism that Trump and company are trying to sell, like snake oil salesmen at a Depression-era religious revival. This is just a cynical way to play people while raping them of any remaining wealth. The planned so-called repeal and replacement of the Affordable Care Act is perhaps the most cynical of these. The result would give wealthy people a huge tax break while kicking tens of millions of poor and middle-class Americans off affordable health care. That's playing quite a trick on the people who voted for you and got you elected as president. A classic bait and switch. This dark shadow of Trump and his administration must be confronted and a genuine way found to address the real needs of we, the people. And while on one level the split is between liberals and conservatives in our society, the more serious split, I would argue, is that between the wealthy 1% and the rest of us. What the wealthy 1% have managed to do, at least those on the radical right, is to use that liberal-conservative dichotomy to their advantage. In particular, to convince unsuspecting conservative voters to support getting their candidates elected, even though they consistently govern against their best interests. What Trump and friends have accomplished is to raise all of this to a new art form, using fearful and sometimes hateful nationalist and populist rhetoric. This sells very well right now in Middle America, but buyer's remorse may be just around the corner. It could be swift and ugly. Trump as trickster may be able to fool some of the people some of the time, but certainly not all of the people all of the time, as P.T. Barnum once famously stated. The trickster archetype manifests now to show us how deep the split is within the American and global psyche, both between rich and poor, liberal and conservative. Though we'd rather not deal with it, we're charged with the tremendous task of healing this split, first within our own psyche, and then in the American and world psyche. Confronted with our own dark shadow, we have no choice but to assimilate it. If we continue simply projecting the shadow onto the other, we risk becoming engulfed by it. Though it is a great crisis to confront, it also presents us with a great opportunity for psychological growth and renewal. The trickster confronts us now with this sacred task.